In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Lord our God, we thank you for bringing us together. You've promised us that where 2 or 3 are gathered in your name, there you will be in our midst. And here we are, more than 2 or 3 gathered together in your name. We ask you to open our hearts. We ask you to connect us more closely with each other, to connect us more closely with you, to make the time that we spend together fruitful, to give us something that we can take with us as we continue the journey of Great Lent and as we prepare ourselves for your cross and your glorious resurrection. We ask this of you, together with your Father, who is without beginning, and your all holy, good, and life-giving Spirit, now and forever, and to the ages of ages.
Amen. All right, thanks. Well, welcome everyone who's here. I'm Christina Andreessen. I'm the Director of Ministries for OCF, and tonight I will be serving as your moderator. So before we get started, I just want to, if you haven't used Zoom webinar before, just give you a quick orientation. So it seems like some of you have already found the chat. So you're welcome to chat in the chat all throughout the discussion. There's a Q&A button also at the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to ask a question anonymously or privately, I'll see those questions and I'll make sure that Steve gets a chance to answer them. And then finally, we're going to have some opportunity to actually interact with one another and for you to come up on the screen and talk with Steve and with Andrew and myself. So when that time comes, Steve's going to pitch a question your way and you're going to push the button that says raise a hand. I feel like all you guys are probably using this for online school right now. So I might be just like telling you things you already know. But you'll raise your hand and then I will bring you up on the screen as a panelist and you'll get to be part of the discussion for a little bit. And then we can send you back to the crowds if you prefer. So glad you're here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew for some announcements and then Steve for our discussion.
All right, guys. Thanks for all being here tonight. I know, obviously it's kind of with a little bit of like obviously we're excited to be here, but it's a little hesitation that we can't be actually together. But, we're making the best of it. And I've had a good time doing these things so far. So I hope you guys have enjoyed them as well. A few announcements for OCF things coming up. We do have a lot of other OCF at home things that are happening. So check the website for that. And then, so if you haven't heard me talk about it, you probably haven't been near me enough, but Student Leadership Board applications are still open. That will close on Sunday. So it's actually coming soon now. For everyone who I've bothered over the past month and a half, it's like actually here. So check that out. You can also find that in the Instagram bio or just going on the website. We have a lot of different positions available. So one of the ones you probably are most familiar with is your regional student leader, because they probably reached out to you at some point this year. So, regional student leaders, that's what I am right now. What we do is we work within our regions to coordinate all of the activities within each chapter and between chapters. We plan retreats, we reach out to people. We're basically just that point of contact so that when people come to you and say, hey, I want OCF, but there's nothing at my school, I say, all right, let's make it happen. And then we do. So we also have our college conference student leaders who are probably on this call. I saw one of them.
One of them was on here being rude already.
I know, right? I would say it's shocking, but it's not. So college conference is our end of the year conference every December. And for those of you who haven't been to it, it's a 4-day conference either at Antiochian Village or at St. Iacovos. So basically as college conference student leader, you are that conference. You plan it with a few different, with your committee, but you're up there leading. You work with the speakers, everyone who comes and enjoys that conference. So it's a lot of responsibility, but it's also an amazing opportunity. And, it's so cool to see the people who do it just shine at what they do. Also, we have our outreach team. So social media, blog, publications, and our podcasts. Those are all positions that, ways that we reach out to people and try to connect with people online. That's what all the kids are doing now. And so within each of those individual paths, you have student leaders who are working there. And then our last one is our Real Break students. So unfortunately, we did have to cancel a few Real Break trips Still hoping that mine's not getting canceled. But we do have a Real Break student leader who works tirelessly to send out the emails, coordinate all the trips. So, if you've been impacted by Real Break, if you love Real Break, if you love OCF, apply to the board. That, I believe, is all I have. So without any further waste of your time, I'm going to turn it over to Steve.
Never a waste of time. I did forget to mention on Steve's behalf earlier that he wants us all to have paper and pen, or the back of an envelope to take notes on. He might be asking us to do a little bit of journaling, and so if you want to take 30 seconds to go run and find a journal, if you want to keep it more permanently, or if you want to just grab something to jot notes down on, now's your moment. Go.
Upon which to jot notes.
Okay. Thank you. Correcting my grammar, of course.
Also, I want to thank Andrew for informing all of us that online is where the kids are nowadays. I'm going to take that back to work with me. That's helpful.
My dad was just on a Zoom call, and I had to inform him of that too. So
we've all learned something already. Like this has already been an edifying experience for everybody.
Well,
are we still stalling awkwardly while people get journal stuff, or should we get going?
I think you should get going. It's much better than the awkward. Let's do it.
Okay. I thrive on awkward. Anyway, hi everybody. Thanks for being here. I want to reveal something about myself that's going to help sort of frame what we're going to be talking about this evening. For a long time, and I'm still sort of recovering with this, I have this constant sense that I have to be the best at whatever it is that I am doing. I think it's from when I was a little kid, and I remember I would bring home like a 97 or a 98, and my parents would be like, oh, you could have gotten a 99 or 100, right? And there was always this sort of sense that like, it's never good enough. There has to be more. I have to be the best at whatever I'm doing, which is not healthy anywhere, as I've learned as I've grown up. It's particularly not healthy in the spiritual life. And that's why the maxim that I want to talk about this evening is the second maxim of Father Tom Hopko: pray as you can, not as you think you must. And I think last week you got a little intro on like his maxims and how many there are and so forth, right? He's got 55 maxims. We don't need to go into that. I just kind of want to talk a little bit about that from my experience, and then I want to hear a little bit from you. So I'll share a story. Again, this mania to try to be the best at everything is something I've had since a little kid. It definitely carried forward when I went to seminary, which is when I met Christina and became friends with Christina. We were both sort of little freshy seminarians that came in at the same time to Hellenic College Holy Cross. And I remember, right, like when I appeared at Hellenic College Holy Cross, I didn't look as I do now. I had like scraggly old big beard, and I had sort of like big long, kind of top knot kind of thing. I had very sort of pseudo-monastic pretensions about myself. And that was reflected also in the way that I would like approach prayer. I had this mania about like, I have to do so many prostrations during the course of the day. Like prayer is not good enough unless I'm doing it for hours during the course of the day. And I had this like really ridiculous, unhealthy prayer rule that I had crafted for myself, not at the direction of a spiritual father or anything, even though I had a spiritual father. And it was like long and it was convoluted, and it became this wonderful sort of source of pride. And then I get myself to campus, and I'm surrounded by these actual kind and humble and generous people. And the whole thing like fell apart. Literally, the whole thing fell apart. I went from probably doing at like the peak, like hundreds of prostrations a day to nothing. And the reason why, in retrospect, I understand this is because the person that I was ultimately like adoring in all of this, the person that I was trying to satiate in all of this was me. And we've read this before in scripture. We actually read it a few weeks ago as we were getting ready to get into Great Lent. It's the parable of the publican and the Pharisee, right? The Pharisee, I always get the two confused because they both start with the letter P. The Pharisee did all the right religious stuff, and he did it often, and he did it to the required level. He would fast twice a week, and he prayed, and he gave alms and so forth, right? He did all the stuff. But the real kicker, as we see in Luke chapter 18, verse 11, ultimately it was about him. There's that really classic moment. He gets to the front of the temple, and he announces to everybody, and he says, the Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself. That, I think, is one of the difficulties or the risks potentially when prayer becomes a thing that we try to do, when volume is done for the sake of volume, when it is about like outdoing others and sort of being the best at or doing the most of or whatever it is. Not a thing that is a spiritual experience, a thing that is kind of like a another notch in our belts when it comes to the successes that we try to accrue during the course of our lives. Like it's the same sort of instinct that wants us to get the best grades. It's the same sort of instinct that it's kind of this like this kind of self-centered sort of thing, or at least it was for me, right? And it was like that for a long time, and I still have that in most of the things I do, which is probably the reason why I'm on camera for a lot of the things I do for work. I still sort of struggle with a sense of prima donna-ness and self-centeredness and whatever. Totally honest. My question for you is, right, what has the experience of prayer been like for you? Have you ever struggled with a sense of, I'm not doing it enough? Have you ever struggled with a sense of that kind of pressure of like, I have to do it more. I have to do it more. I'm not doing it enough. I'm not sort of living up to this level. Have you ever had that instinct of the externals rather that have maybe potentially distracted you away from some of the more internal relational stuff that hopefully should there when it comes to cultivating our spiritual life? I don't know. Am I the only sort of like type A maniac in the room, or has anybody else kind of struggled with something along those lines? So I want us to take a pause and maybe take about 30 seconds to a minute, jot down in your journal, think about that experience. Does it resonate? Does it not resonate? And maybe we can talk about it in a second. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Christina.
Sure. Does anybody want to raise their hand and share? I would love to hear what you guys have to say about what Steve just presented in terms of like what your experience of prayer has been, or what kind of pressures maybe you put on yourself. All right, Dima's going to join us. Hopefully Zoom is a little quicker today about it. Go Zoom. Hey Dima, how are you?
Hi Dima.
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you so much for putting this on. Yeah, so I struggle with this because on many levels, right? What you're saying, Steve, resonates with me a lot in terms of just you can't sort of white knuckle your way into faith, especially if you're doing it sort of for yourself. But on the other hand, prayer never seems to be something that I do. It's something that's done sort of to me, because there are many days where I sort of wake up and I don't necessarily want to pray, but I know that it's good because sort of the words tend to, you know, there's always the metaphor of like water dripping on a stone basically, and eventually it smooths it out. And so there's always an idea of like I should do this because maybe it'll actually work on me, when like I don't necessarily want to do it. Perhaps one day I will, you know, want to keep going. And so that's sort of, those are sort of the thoughts that are running through my head right now.
Interesting.
I want to highlight that one statement that you made, which was really powerful to me anyway, right? Like prayer is not something I do. Prayer is a thing that kind of happens to me or happens through me. I just kind of want to put a pin in it because that there was something really resonant about that. So thank you, Dima, for sharing.
I think it goes Maria, then Lazzy, then Ben. Welcome, guys, and then Jacob. Sorry, I didn't forget you.
Yeah, when I pray, it seems like there are different mentalities that I have in different circumstances. Because sometimes I'm just rushing along and just praying, like just praying. And then sometimes it's very formal. And other times when I'm very stressed and very low points in my life, I feel like that's when I'm most communicating with Christ.
Can I ask a question to you, Maria? Thank you for sharing. What do you think it is about those low points that makes things different?
I think I'm more desperate for him. Like, I feel like I actually need him at that point in my life. Sometimes I get full of hubris sometimes, and I just don't pray as meaningfully, even if I do keep praying.
Yeah. So maybe one way to that I'm receiving what you're saying, which again is very powerful and very personal. It's like the difference between white knuckling it, right? To use that phrase that Dima mentioned before, for the sake of sort of getting to a certain level or doing a certain thing or satisfying a certain task, right? Versus in those low points, not desperate to complete the task, but desperate for him. Like there's something sort of much more personal, it seems like, in those moments when prayer hits more. Desperate for him, not anxious to complete the task.
Yes.
Cool. Thank you, Maria.
Sorry. Yeah, Lazzy, you're next. Go ahead.
Yeah. I find that the problem I seem to have the most is an issue of consistency, where there are some moments where you feel just so desperate to pray at that moment. There's nothing else you want to do, whether that be a moment of personal crisis or whatnot. And then there are other moments where, you just try and set up a rule of prayer and you can't even follow it. It's like, in a certain sense, it's kind of amazing what the coronavirus has done, because they say 20 seconds you can say the Our Father, and that's already is a better rule of prayer than anything else I've done before, because I may set one up, but then it falls down after 3 days.
So this again is very powerful and very vulnerable of you, Lazzy. Thank you. A thing that I'm receiving from there, right, which kind of resonates with my experience, it's the difference between a thing that's I set up, a plan that I sort of make for myself, right, versus a thing that kind of happens to me. Like, because I remember like times of like, I'm going to set this rule and it's going to be great and it's going to be wonderful and I'm going to be the holiest guy on the block, right? Versus the 20 seconds is kind of a thing that is imposed upon me from like, there's something inherently humble about just sort of receiving these constraints that are placed upon me, as opposed to like, these are the terms that I sort of set for myself. And there's something different, right, in terms of our underlying motivation, a thing that I plan, a thing that I whatever, versus a thing that happens to me. So yeah, that was powerful. And I totally resonate that. I kind of wish that I said the Our Father more than I hand wash. And as Christina knows, I definitely hand wash a lot. I'm more of a happy birthday guy myself. I need to, no, yeah. Anyway, thank you, Leslie. I appreciate that.
Yeah, but you know what? I love though that like this crisis is helping you see a way in which prayer can be part of your everyday. I think one of the ways we maybe think one of the pray as we must ways we think is that it has to look like we read from a book for a certain number of minutes at a certain time of day. But if we're going to be people who pray ceaselessly, washing your hands or folding your laundry or taking a 10-minute walk or whatever it is are also moments of prayer. Like those are also opportunities. One of our professors at seminary said to us once that these days people's cars are monastic cells on wheels. Just don't turn on the radio for your commute each day, and use that time to be with God. Anyway, I'm probably getting a little ahead of myself, but I really liked what you said, Lazzy, about like Lazzy. I feel bad that I'm not sure that I'm saying your name right.
Lazzy, if we want to go
Lazzy. Yes. That, there's these other opportunities to have something that could be considered a rule of prayer that's not just, I don't know, what we might imagine it is.
And
Go ahead.
I'll
Yeah.
also add, I find sometimes that even the most basic rule of just waking up in the morning and remembering to pray, that can fail. And that's like the simplest rule there is. Just say, Lord have mercy, or an Our Father, whatever it may be. So it's quite
Right.
remarkable how just washing your hands can do something.
Right. I think Ben and then Jacob. And then we have a couple of questions or comments from the chat.
So I think for me, coming back home has been really weird because I'm the only Orthodox person in my family. And, trying to keep my prayer rule gets like, I don't know, it's really weird when my Southern Baptist parents walk in and I'm saying a prayer to the Mother of God. Like, it just, it's kind of thrown me off. It's been a little bit difficult because in the back of my head, I'm like, someone could walk in and, there's me, standing in front of an icon corner with candles going in front of icons and like saying prayers out loud. It's been really weird and just, I don't know. And then also kind of being in a different environment has just thrown me off completely. I don't know. It's been definitely more of a test than Lent was last year, but I think that's pretty universal for everyone, especially like, prayer and fasting kind of go hand in hand. And, like I don't know, like what is the balance of, asking my parents to get like vegan food or stuff like that, because we don't really have a lot of that at home. And, I'm stuck at my house and can't really go out and do stuff. So it's just, I don't know. It's been a particularly difficult Lent.
Hmm. Now, so this is interesting, right? Because the way that I'm hearing this too, like you're sort of, it sounds like you're persevering. It sounds like you're sort of with it. And there's this added layer of difficulty that's creating sort of just extra sort of little hurdles, little sort of challenges along the way. And it sounds like none of them have sort of been roadblocks that have stopped you necessarily, right? They're just kind of like Lent is being lentier this year, the way that Lent is being like a little lentier for everybody this year. And that's interesting, right? It's like, it's a degree of difficulty that you haven't chosen. It's a degree of difficulty that is sort of like landed in your lap, and you just kind of like have to make the most of it in those situations and roll with the punches. And we sort of, in the same way that we were saying before with Lazi, right? It's like, okay, like this thing has happened to me, and I have all these sort of like extra moments for reflection. Like these are, it's I guess the difference potentially between seeing things as obstacles versus opportunities, right? Seeing the difficulties that we're kind of encountering on our spiritual life. Are they things that get in the way of our sanctification, or are they kind of the arena in which we're struggling for that sanctification? I feel like there's a strong resonance between that and Christina's point before about like the car technology, whatever it is. It's like, it's not a thing in the way. It's just kind of like the cell today, and your cell now is in your parents' house. And that cell doesn't necessarily have the same sort of hermetic seal that it would have had elsewhere. So the cell is just different. And you didn't choose it. You didn't want it to be harder for the sake of being harder. And and Lord have mercy.
Yeah.
Jacob.
Hey, so I actually had a similar experience to you, Steve, freshman year of undergrad for me, where I got this Russian prayer book, and I started to like say all the prayers exactly as they were, and it became this sort of source of pride, like, oh, I can pray this many prayers and that sort of thing. But eventually I realized that I was using all of that to avoid God, if that made sense. Like I was using saying prayers to avoid God. And after a while, I brought this to my spiritual father and I told him my thoughts about this, and he said, well, you should stop praying, which was sort of shocking advice. He said, stop praying and just sit in front of an icon of Christ for 5 minutes, and that will be your prayer. And I think that sort of process made me deal more with myself instead of just, I'm reciting these things because I have to recite them for my own ego or whatever reasons. Now I had to just sit in front of an icon of Christ and stare at it to consider him. I had to consider myself, and it made me sort of, I think, more cognizant of how things were going overall.
Yeah. That's like powerful and bold advice. That hits me like right there. Cause that, again, like I totally resonate with that. and I think that really connects with Dima's point earlier too, about like prayer not as this thing that I do. Prayer is this thing that sort of like happens to me, right? And it's interesting because like again, I really resonate with that. The way that prayer, if it's done in that, I don't know what you want to call it. I don't want to be sort of uncharitable and say Pharisee-like, right? But again, for myself, right, the times that I've kind of like prayed in a Pharisee-like sort of way, I haven't been dealing with who I am, and it hasn't been about the Lord. And there's something like really wise about just like put yourself in his presence and forget about the long sort of whatever, and just like actually look at him and be open to him and open your heart to him and figure out all and feel all the ways that your heart doesn't actually open, because it's more tied up in kind of the artifice of the persona that we create for ourselves sometimes, right? Like I am good at this, or I can do a lot of that, or whatever it is, as opposed to like, Lord, I'm broken and I'm in your presence. And wow, this is awkward. You know, that's super powerful. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for everybody sharing and just having the courage to share.
One thing came up in the Q&A, and it just really kind of spoke to me. They were saying how like difficult, like just commenting a little bit more on like the difficulty of this Lent specifically, because we are all out of our comfort zone. I mean, obviously that's like kind of what Lent is, but with this situation, like it's hard to establish a routine, you know, especially like we're not attending church. Like I know like for me, it's like being in church is what makes it Lent, because it's like the sights and the sounds, and you know, like we don't have that. But you know, it was just like yesterday, Christina was telling me about how you know, in Greece, for example, like 400 years there was no church. Like they didn't go to church. And like same thing in Russia during like Soviet times, like they didn't go to church because like they couldn't go to church, but like they kept the faith alive in their hearts. And I don't know, when she told me that was like a really cool story.
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot of ways. So one, I don't know if this is helpful. A phrase or kind of like a way of even thinking about that in kind of relation to this conversation. It's like it's where we have to sort of clarify: are we in it for the orthodoxy or are we in it for the Christianity? And by that I mean, because like obviously like the Orthodox Church is the church, it's the body of Christ, but like orthodoxy by itself, like Schmemann talks about this sometimes too, Father Alexander Schmemann, like you can have kind of a Christless orthodoxy in the same way that you can have kind of godless prayer, right? Like when you're up there praying to yourself. And it's one of those things that like, it becomes kind of a gut check moment. Yeah, we lack a lot of those stuff, which ideally, right, when we're approaching them the right way, are things that lead us to the Lord. But sometimes they can be things that we sort of appreciate maybe too much in and of themselves. You know, does that become the sort of like the difficulty?
Yeah, like is orthodoxy becoming the God instead of Christ becoming the God?
You know, the externals, right? The path is the end rather than the path. Like you have to keep walking the path. You know, it takes us to Him.
Y'all know how I feel about that. One of my biggest pet peeves, if you ever do anything with me for OCF, is if you try to tell me you have a relationship with your faith, I will push you real hard on that one. You don't have, you can't, or your relationship
with a thing, right?
With your orthodoxy, like that doesn't work. You can have a relationship with your Lord in the Orthodox Church, like through His church by being part of His body. But yeah, you can't have a relationship with your faith. So just cut that out of your vocabulary. Reconsider what you mean when you say that. Father Peter, you're here. We can't see you, but if you want to start your video, we'd love to hear what you have to add.
Father Peter, hi.
I've been here the whole time, but I'm a little deficient in technology. I'm enjoying hearing all of you. It's great to see you, Steve, and thank you for doing this. I thought maybe, and I don't know if this will be something for later, but the word rule came up a couple of times, and I don't know if we made, you know, the word rule maybe in English may have a kind of a different ring than it does as canon in Greek, as more of a guide. and so maybe something that's supposed to have a result rather than something that we're supposed to just follow. And one thing that struck me when I was a teacher, there was this nice book called How to Be an Effective I think you're gone already. Oh, How to Be an Effective Teacher on the First Days of School. And one of the things that it says, and I'll read it. It says, a rule is a dare to be broken, whereas a procedure is not. A procedure is a do, a step to be learned. And I kind of think that the word rule in English has a negative ring, like it's some kind of quota to meet. And you know, St. Paul, when he talks about prayer, says that that the Holy Spirit helps us in the things that we're lacking, and because we don't know what to pray for, that the Holy Spirit intercedes with ceaseless or unmentioned or indescribable. I don't remember the word, groanings. And, you know, so it isn't us at all when we're praying. And I think that with prayer and fasting, you know, the consideration is really what's the result that's supposed to come of this, and not so much what is the, you know, the rule, because rules sort of feel like dares almost, and we can force ourselves to sort of go in the opposite direction, and I think having that as maybe a thought that, you know, fasting is supposed to have a result and prayer is supposed to have a result, and the connection with God is the number one result. That's a miracle that when we can have that time and enjoy it. And one other thing, I know I'm going a little longer than everybody else has, but I just think of you know, when my mom says, "Did you call your brothers?" She's saying, "Did you connect?" You know, she's not asking how long did you talk to your brothers. Did you spend 25 minutes on the phone with Andrew? Did you spend 25 minutes on the phone this week with Matthew? Did you, you know, and it's more like, you know, when you love somebody, it's a time to interact. It's not that I'm counting how many times I called them or how much, but it's because I want to spend time with them, you know. So, and Saint Basil, you know, somebody who really prays beautifully is Saint Basil. Thank God we have his prayers still in writing. But one of the things that struck me is he says, "Wound our soul with your love." So if Saint Basil feels desensitized, and he expressed that in prayer, we all do. So many people in confession talk about how little they pray or how poorly they pray. We're all terrible at it, because it's not from us, it's from the Holy Spirit. And so we just keep asking God to wound us. And that has helped me when I feel miserable at it.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And I think maybe the spirit of that kind of connects to the advice that Christina says she gives out too, right? Like when and this is where language gets important, right? Because in the same way that we can sometimes talk about, you know, connecting with faith rather than connecting with God, we can even talk about Lent in the sense of like, you know, we can't eat meat for 40 days, or I'm not allowed to eat meat for 40 days, right? No, it's like it's something we choose. It's something we enter sort of like freely, and we enter with joy. I have to go to church this morning. It's like, no, I choose to go to church, right? Maybe that if like a sort of a, you know, the first maybe practical takeaway of today is to sort of be mindful of our language that is abstract or organizational versus personal, right? Faith versus God, my connection to faith versus my connection to God, and language that is sort of rule-based and joyless versus keeping the end in mind, keeping him in mind, and joyful. I choose to fast. It's something I do to draw closer to my God. It's to be reminded of my emptiness without him. I don't have to go to church today. I choose to go to church today. And maybe this is one of the other kind of like interesting wrinkles of this Lentier Lent that we have right now, because much more of it is like intentional. Much more of it is intentional. Like there are things that are sort of withheld from us, but there's time that is given to us, way more time that is given to us, and way more opportunities that are given to us potentially in certain circumstances. Having a house that's full also sort of presents like different kinds of things. Like it's just process versus joy. I think, mindful of our language.
Yeah. Well, I want you to tell your next story, Steve, but one thing I'm noticing a lot in the chat that maybe we should take a second to talk about, or maybe you think this might come up in our next story, was a lot of people feeling like they don't pray enough, like that they're not enough of their day or enough minutes. Like this pray without ceasing model, it makes it feel like whatever we're offering then always feels insufficient. Yeah. I'm just noticing a lot of people say that. So I don't know if you have something that you want to say on that, or if you want to tell the story of Simeon maybe as a way to open up that conversation.
Yeah. So this I think is like, it's a perfect segue. It's like the news right now. It's like the evening news. Perfect segue. There's a story that I want to tell, which we told actually on an episode of Be the Bee. It was episode 81. Pray Simply, Pray Always is what it's called. And to this day, it's one of my favorite episodes we've ever done. It's a story. It's a real story. It's a story that comes from this book called Ascetics in the World, which is now available in English. Stories that were compiled by Saint Paisios and one of his spiritual children, an anonymous monastic on Mount Athos. Just stories of a bunch of regular people in the world doing their struggles. And one of them is this guy named Simeon, who lived in the first part of the 20th century. And Simeon was a guy who, again, like the world was a different place even in the early 20th century. Greece was a different place than it is today in the early 20th century. He was a guy who grew up in a relatively agrarian part of the country. He really had this desire to go and serve the church and be a monk even, but he couldn't. He had to stay home with his family. He had to work the fields. He had all these responsibilities that he had to do to care for his parents, care for his siblings, whatever it is. So he couldn't go and immerse himself into prayer the way that he wanted to. He had this instinct too, like, I want to do more. I want to put myself in an atmosphere where there's constant prayer around me. So he couldn't do that because he had these constraints upon him. And when he was home, he couldn't even do something as simple and pick up a prayer book because he was illiterate. So he had all of these things that seemed to be getting in the way. Like, I want to pray a lot, and circumstances kept getting in the way. So what would he do? He would wake up in his little, he lived very simply. He would wake up in his little cell, so to speak, this little shack he had on the farm. And he'd go, the moment he opened his eyes, he'd go right to the icon. He'd make his cross, and he'd look at the icon very sweetly, and he'd say, "Good morning, Jesus. It's me, Simeon. Thank you for waking me up. Give me the strength to provide for my family today, and just help me and strengthen me." And he would go, and he would work the fields, and he would do farmer things. I didn't grow up on a farm, so I don't know what farmer things are, right? And he would come back to the house at the end of the day, sweaty and tired, and he would immediately go back to his icon, and he'd say, "Good evening, Jesus. It's me, Simeon. Thank you for providing for me during the course of the day. Give me a restful sleep and wake me up in the morning to do it again." That was his prayer rule. That was his prayer rule, right? His actual sort of spoken prayer, if you think about it, was 10 seconds in the morning, 10 seconds in the evening. And this is what he did very faithfully. The moment he opened his eyes, the last thing he did before he closed his eyes in the evening. Fast forward now a couple of decades, he's an old man, he's surrounded by family, right? They know that he's in a hospital in Athens. He's in the midst of this. Family is surrounding him, they're talking, they're spending time, they know things are getting close. And suddenly, as they're having a conversation, he just kind of freezes. And his eyes go to the door, and people look, and there's nobody at the door. And his eyes kind of track across the room, and they just settle at the foot of his bed. And he's entranced for a couple of seconds. The family is looking, they have no idea what's going on. He finally comes to himself again and acknowledges them, and they say, "What happened? We were talking, you were here, and then suddenly you were staring off into space, and you were just sort of staring fixedly at the foot of your bed. Like, what happened? Are you okay?" And he says, "I saw this man walk into the door. I just connected with him instantly. There was something about him, and he stared at me, and he walked to the foot of my bed, and he looked me right in the eye, And he smiled at me and he said, Simeon, good afternoon, Simeon. My name is Jesus. This afternoon, you're going to be with me in my kingdom. And he passed away very peacefully just a few hours after that. And we think, like, what does it mean to pray constantly, right? This was a guy who was a saintly man who prayed constantly, even if his prayer rule itself was these 10 seconds of audible prayer in the morning and 10 seconds of audible prayer in the evening. It was a guy who went out there and broke his back to take care of his family in a prayerful sort of way, even though what he wanted was to go and escape and become a monk and immerse himself into something so much deeper, right? It was a guy who his first thought every morning turned to the Lord. And every breath he took, every time he strained with the plow, whatever it is, he did it to the glory of God, and he did it for the sake of his family. And the last thing he did when he got home, dirty and tired as he was, just a simple little good evening. You know, it was about connection. It was about reliance. It was about the posture of his heart. That Jesus wasn't simply like an idea for him, like Jesus was real. Jesus was a person that he encountered every morning. Jesus was a person he encountered every evening. Jesus was a person that he encountered every moment of every day, even if it wasn't books or words out of a prayer book or anything along those lines. So yeah, like constant prayer is certainly possible, but I think we maybe have to challenge what we think prayer is, right? Because he was doing an inadequate job in a formalistic sort of sense. He was getting up there for just a few seconds every morning and every evening, but there was purity there. And there was purity in his 10 seconds that my self-imposed prayer rule that I had back in the day, like he had way more actual connection to somebody outside of himself. You know, it wasn't inward looking, it was outward looking. And there was joy to that. And what I want to invite you to do for a second is, you know, because I think we think about the story of Simeon and there's something simple, there's something peaceful. It's not to say easy all the time necessarily, because again, when he came home at the end of his time in the fields, he was sweaty, he was tired. It wasn't easy necessarily. They were still pushing. But the word that comes to my heart when I think of the way Simeon prayed, there was something natural to it. There was something natural and there was something connective to it. And what I want to ask is, can you think of a time when prayer for you felt natural in that way? When something went right? What went right? And what can you potentially learn to take forward and try to do more of in your life going forward? So again, we'll take a minute, we'll journal, and then we'll come back together. Okay, why don't we come back together? We'll do the same thing we did last time. Is there anybody who wants to raise a digital hand? And
Marcus was already ready.
Hi, Marcus.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for and thank you, Christina and Andrew, as well for putting all this together. I loved the word natural that you used, and I was going back through some of the notes that I've taken in a philosophy theology class I was taking at school, and I stumbled as you were telling the story about the monk. I came across this quote about this man's idea of speech, and he says the human voice becomes a place in which the world can return to God. And in my personal experience, in my freshman year in college, Holy Week Holy Week happened to be the second to last week of school. So it was the last week of classes, and it ended up being normally it's a very chaotic time, as I'm sure a lot of other college students know, that all these projects and papers are due right at the end of the semester. And about 5 or 6 months later, I was looking back at that Holy Week, and I realized I didn't remember doing any homework that week. I actually, looking back, I cannot remember a single time in which I was in the library or having books in front of me or anything. All I remember from that week is being in church, as many of the nights of the week that I could do based on the parish that I was at. And that was the first thing that came to mind when you said natural, was just this gathering work of prayer that was so effortless, that it was just being with the people and around, as Andrew was saying, around the voices and the sounds and this expectation and this hope that's built into us during Lent, that we realize that by the time we get there, that we're all just at the 11th hour. We're always coming to the chalice and to Pascha broken and yet hopeful. So natural, I think, is a good understanding of how both of those can coexist in our prayer lives.
Broken yet hopeful. Broken yet hopeful. That's beautiful. So Marcus, if I'm understanding you, maybe to tease this out, is there something, because I think I heard you say the word together a few times. Was there something about sort of the Christians that you were gathering around? Was there something about this kind of us as a body? Was there something? Because again, I heard that word a lot, together, as you were speaking.
I think one of the things is together, and the gathering work of being with the college students that I was with specifically was the church that I go to at school is almost a 45-minute drive from campus. So I remember those drives more than school, but not as much as church. But like, those are the things that stand out to me as that this is what is bringing us together, that we're actually just here, present. And I think that even as we were praying together, I was becoming more aware of the people standing next to me, actually. That I was actually becoming more aware of my place in a church, and in what we were all going through, like as we were all going through Lent together. I think that the togetherness actually came about because I realized the brokenness in me and in everyone else around me, and yet I was at peace with that. So I think the togetherness comes with a mercy, really.
Togetherness and mercy. Well said. Beautifully said. Thank you.
Thanks.
Next up is Teddy, and then Joshua, and then Matt.
There we go. Can you all hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Teddy.
Hi. So an example, going back to your question, recently in my life, because you mentioned like frustration and just dealing with that. Can you repeat the question real quick? Just, I know what I'm going to say. I'm trying to remember the exact wording.
Can you think of times in your life when prayer felt natural? Natural. Yeah. Yeah.
So, this past summer, I was much heavier than I used to be. I used to weigh closer to around 300 pounds. I was 282 starting out this one summer. And one of the frustrations I had, I started a diet program and started eating a lot healthier, started doing exercise going into the fall semester. And something that I would do is prayer life for me when it's in a formal setting is more dry. But something that I did to make it feel a little more natural for me was when I would go work out and I would go, do weightlifting, cardio, whatever it was. I use those opportunities basically to take one of the things that I originally hated doing, and I just use it as time to, think and reflect and just try to not necessarily speak directly, but just kind of listen and just think about everything going on in my life and tying it back and just reflecting about where I've come from and tying it back to God. And in doing that, I was able to, I guess you could say, start a little bit more of a natural feeling prayer life, but also encourage natural habits that ended up allowing me to lose about 82 pounds this last semester. And it's been a life-changing experience for me. And it's something that I continue to do each day when I work out, and obviously not right now, but hopefully when the gym's open back up.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
A, congratulations. That's a huge thing.
Yeah.
And B, I think a thing that really like hits me is this kind of nice synergy between sort of spiritual health and physical health,
Mhm.
right? Like one of the things that sometimes we do is we compartmentalize ourselves, and like, there's my church self that does these things, and there's my, whatever self.
Mhm.
And what you're doing, which, and maybe this is part of what makes it natural, is you're approaching this time as an embodied soul,
Mhm.
right? Like, I have a body and I'm sort of aesthetically working my body. I have a soul.
Mhm.
I'm aesthetically working my soul. I'm kind of
Mhm.
like, as a person, cultivating things. I mean,
Mhm.
like even like Father Alexander Schmemann in Great Lent, he talks about sort of the intentionality about it, and the way that, like the Lenten journey can include like art, and it can include, physical health, and just kind of not segmenting ourselves and just bringing everything into this alignment. And it sounds like that's what you're doing. So God
Mhm.
bless you, man. That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I already forgot, so I hope you remember. Joshua, you're next. Oh,
Oh,
did I move the wrong person? I'm so sorry. I'll bring Joshua back up, and after Joshua was Matt. So go ahead, Matt.
Me, yes?
Yes, you.
Okay, wonderful. So, back this past December, like I got really, really sick, as in like laid out flat, fever in bed, curling up, horrible cough sort of thing. Like I was out for like a good week and a half, and I had exams right then. I find that when your body is broken, like the spirit, like your spirit is also attacked more. So like I just felt entirely dejected. And I couldn't do my prayer rule, because I could get out of bed to scarf down some soup and maybe brush my teeth. But the only thing I could do in bed was lie back and Jesus prayer myself to sleep, because you have a fever, you got a headache, like it's bad. And that reminded me of like when you were telling the story of Simeon, that just kind of like jogged this memory of what simple prayer is, and this necessity to, okay, Matt, a sacrifice to God is a broken spirit. Your spirit's broken right now, and that's all you got. All you you can't even get up to light a candle and look Christ in the eye, the icons, because you can't get out of bed. But what you can do is pray the Jesus prayer, all that you can think of and all that you can utter, because again, your voice is gone. And that's when prayer becomes peaceful in this really weird sense. It's like the worst, when you are at your worst, you've suddenly like got it, you're at your best. So there's an answer to you.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Matt. That's right. When there's nothing we can do, who's going to be there to pick up the pieces, right? I mean, that it sounds like one of those moments, because this connects even to what Maria said in our last round of Q&A, right? Like, it's in those low points where it feels more natural, like you're flat on your back. It's the Lord that's going to lift you up. It's, Romans 8, I think it is, right? Like, he desires that all should stand, and he lifts us. So beautiful. Thank you, Matt.
Joshua, you are up. Sorry for accidentally kicking you off.
Hey again, Joshua.
Just some time when prayer felt natural. I find for me, prayer at home, I usually, gosh, I don't want to try to like pat myself on the back, but it's a little easier to focus on prayer at home versus prayer at church during the services. I tend to lose kind of focus a little easier because I'm an altar server. So it's like a lot of times I'm thinking about when I have to get censer ready and open the door for the deacon and that sort of thing. So for me, one time when it finally started to feel a little more natural to pray in church, kind of in my role at least, was during like a pre-sanctified. It was almost very scenic, the way everything came together. It was, like I said, it was pre-sanctified, and it was in the evening, and the way the light was coming in through the window and the way the choir was singing, it was like in that moment, all of my kind of trying to worry about what comes next in the service and what I have to do after church and that sort of thing, everything kind of just left for a moment. I could just focus on this kind of prayer that, the priest was saying, and that how we as the people were responding. And it was kind of like, we talk about how kind of our services are mirrored on this kind of heavenly worship that we find in books like Isaiah and Hebrews. And it kind of felt like I was finally maybe saw a little glimpse of that, and how prayer can feel very natural and beautiful and that sort of thing. So that's kind of the main thing that stuck out to me when I thought about kind of times when prayer felt very natural for me.
Sounds lovely.
Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that moment of clarity and that moment of presence. That's great.
I love how all of these examples are so unique. I just wanted to say that. Just shows the diversity of ways that God works in us at certain times in our lives, or in certain moments when it's our heart needs to be changed. As an altar server, he waited until like the right moment in a service for you to be able to pray. And someone else was talking about like something that they hated maybe about who they were, or was about something they had to do in their day, and that became a place of prayer. And anyway, that's what I wanted to hear from Alexia and then Nick next. But thank you, Joshua, for sharing.
Yep. Thanks, Joshua.
So one of my examples is I come from a family of 6, so all of us are home right now together, and it's a little crazy. But I remember ever since we were little, we'd always pray together right before we'd all go to sleep. Just our Father, not even a minute long. We all just stand in front of the icon and pray together, and then go our separate ways to bed. And kind of grew apart from that as we all grew older, and especially when we all went to college and just different bedtimes, staying up late studying. So now I think it's such a blessing that you can be going through quarantine, you can be going through maybe a sick family member, or just like your own personal mental health struggles, and you can come back to our Father for half a minute at the end of the day in front of an icon. And I think for me personally, that continues to be one of the most peaceful and powerful moments of prayer.
That's beautiful. Again, better a genuine peaceful moment like that than a long string of, right? I mean, that's really great. And it's really wonderful that in the midst of all of these difficulties, there's this kind of old spark that's kind of fanning into a little flame again. That's cool. Thank you, Alexia. Thanks for sharing.
I just want to point out that it is 9:01. So if you need to go, I don't want anyone to feel bad that they are, but last week the conversation kept going for a while, and we would love for you to stick around a little longer. We're going to be here a little longer because we want to hear from the rest of those who have things to share. And I think Steve has one more wrap-up story he wants to tell at the end, so you don't want to miss that. If you don't want to miss that, stick around. But if your hour is up, we understand totally. Thank you, Alexia. Next up is Nick. Hello, Nick.
Hey, so sorry my hour's up. I'm just kidding. First of all, Steve, I'm such a big fan. I saw a few of your videos, so thanks for taking the time to meet with us. But
this is great. Thanks for inviting me into your space. I'm the guest here. Thank you guys for inviting me here.
Yes, but by the way, my sister's also here.
Oh
God. There's my sister Nina.
Hello, Sister Nina.
Hi.
Yes, But anyway, yeah. So yes, my name's Nick. I'm from Florida. I'm in Houston now, but back in Florida for the coronavirus. But the one thing I kind of wanted to talk about with respect to like when prayer felt natural was actually a time that I went on a camping trip with one of my friends who's actually Ben Goolsby spoke earlier, but he invited a bunch of us out.
Nick, your service is you're frozen now. I think you got to go back to the other room you were in. While he gets himself unfrozen, let's let Lazi go. You were next.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, it's kind of a lot of like recent memories seem to come up when a lot of the other people have talked about this. The recent one was like, for me was actually as this Lent was beginning, where, you know, I have a habit I tend to stick a lot in my head, in my mind, right, that's sort of where I live. And I was thinking about like the whole concept of image of God and stuff like that. And I was thinking about how through all the tiny misdeeds, we're kind of destroying that image, right? We're not acting like a mirror of what we're supposed to be, and we're kind of destroying our true nature. And it was in that moment where the prayer felt even most natural, because I'm like, dear God, look what I've done to myself. I'm really destroying my nature as it is. And so in that moment of sort of spiritual weakness, it felt natural to pray. Felt natural to fall down, where if you're, you know, trying to make your own prayer rule, you don't want to prostrate at that moment. But in those moments, it feels just so natural.
There was something that shocked you into it, it sounds like.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing, Lazi.
Nick, you want to try again about your camping story?
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I freeze out?
You did.
You did. But you're back. It's okay.
Oops. All right, I'm back. So yeah, so we're on the camping trip. You know, I just started work, basically in, you know, the hustle bustle of Houston, which is a really big city. And towards the end of the first night that we were there, me, Ben, and one of his other buddies like this was a practice service. I can't remember what I prayed for, but there was just
Poor Nick. He's gonna have to tell us the story in the chat.
Get behind me, weak Wi-Fi. Get behind me.
There, you know, praying, and I just got to
I'm making the harsh decision.
That like was there more so than like that was.
Nick.
Keep on.
We missed like all of that. No, we're sorry. We're sorry. I don't know.
That's okay.
The signal's
I'm
bad.
Sorry. I'm trying to see what I can do. Let's see. For Alexandra and then Julian.
Hello, I am not Alexandra. This is Alexandra.
Sorry.
I'm Nathaniel. Nice to see you again, Steve.
Long time no see. Yeah.
Yeah. So, a time when prayer felt most natural to me, I think what came to my mind first was actually when you were here doing the B Tree at my church, Steve, in Cranston. This was the first session that we had. We were talking about clearing our minds, trying to create more of an inner peace, be able to listen to the still small voice of God. And so we actually put that into practice, doing the sort of quiet time. And at the start, just my mind was just really cluttered, 'cause that's just kind of the kind of person I am. I very often start daydreaming, and just like my thoughts just follow a really weird train of a weird pattern where like I like just I end up thinking about something like I have no idea where my train of thought got there. So just kind of daydreaming is sometimes a weakness of mine, which is a problem, especially if I'm supposed to be listening to someone and I end up zoning out. But anyway, as I kept doing that, trying to calm myself and try to focus on like my breathing and the Lord's Prayer, the thoughts didn't exactly go away. The sort of distracting thoughts that came in, but they changed sort of. Instead of being like just random ideas about things that are going on or just other random things, they kind of became more like images of people that maybe I know or maybe not know so well, maybe I like or don't like as much, but it kind of became more easy to sort of incorporate those thoughts into prayer, and like they were not thoughts so much of random just distractions, but of like actual people that I could pray for. And so it just became a lot more natural. It kind of makes me think a little bit of the thing you talked about, one of the things you talked about in the Live the Word episode about Zacchaeus, where his money, which used to be an instrument of sin, became an instrument of his well-doing. And something similar sort of happened to me. My sort of wandering thoughts, which can be a source of distraction, sort of became more an actual instrument in enhancing my prayer.
Beautiful. So it's like you sort of you jujitsu it a little bit, right? It's like you use the momentum of these thoughts instead of like fighting against them. You actually use them to fuel your prayer.
Sort of transform them, yeah.
Yeah, and that sounds natural, right? Less resistance and more just kind of like you're riding that wave, and you're oh, there's a face, there's a person to love, right?
Yeah,
that's beautiful. Thanks. Good to see your faces again.
Thanks.
Good to see you too.
Nice to see you again too.
Yeah.
All right, Julian, bring us home, and then Steve can wrap us up with the last story. Not wrap us up. That's a weird way to say that. Sorry.
Giant bow.
I like a big blanket burrito. Okay, Julian, say something smart. Quick. Oh, we can't hear you.
Mute?
Nope,
No,
unmuted. There you go.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Now we can
So
hear you.
Steve, you have fans all around the globe. I'm with my cousin joining this conversation. He's in Lebanon, and I'm from Greece. I'm living in Greece. I'm from Lebanon too. So a little bit about the context to start the story. I'm living in Greece as a student. I was traveling from Lebanon to here, and I found myself stuck for 12 days in Cyprus for problem in the airport. And at first, I didn't know what to do. I just started praying with my rope, and then everything changed. Like I was a bit desperate for the first day, and then I felt that everything is going right, and I met the right people to fix this issue. And also they sent me to a monastery to stay for, let's say, 2 days, and then to find a place to stay for the next 2 weeks. And I felt that I'm in a country that I don't understand the language. I don't know anyone, but God just allowed this to happen to maybe to feel this reconnection, and at the same time to feel the Spirit, how the Spirit can actually work in a way that we cannot analyze easily. And this built a trust again, because previously I was, let's say, I used to pray a lot and so on, and because of my travels, and because I was studying now again after a while, I was a bit far, and I felt that this God allowed this experience specifically to reconnect, and it was very natural, I think. And I don't say that we need to wait to be stuck in a problem to get this, but at the same time, I wanted to share this with you. Thank you, guys.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm glad. I think that's wonderful how even these moments of adversity right, became these moments of opportunity. And I like the way that you brought out that word trust in particular, like this kind of trust again, right? Like this experience actually opened up again, trust for the Lord. And yeah, that's wonderful. Thank God. Thanks for sharing.
All right, Steve.
So one last thing, not really a story in the same way, but I feel like that's my dryer. I apologize. My clothes are clean
It's
and dry.
LG, yeah?
I think so. Yeah. Sorry, collect yourselves again. This I think is the perfect time to have this conversation in particular, because think ahead to the Sunday Gospel, right? So we have the Sundays of Lent. This coming Sunday is the Sunday of St. John Climacus, and we read a passage out of Mark chapter 9, which is, you know the story, you've heard the story every year during Lent, when the disciples weren't able to cast out the demon from this child, right? So Jesus is up on the mountain, he comes down, and he sees this father who is there, and this father has this kid, and the kid has a demon, and he's kind of disappointed because the disciples weren't able to do this. And Jesus, of course, takes care of it, right? It's that beautiful passage with, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief, right? The trust that this father has, that as he throws himself at the feet of Jesus, even if he doesn't fully understand. And the disciples are talking about this afterwards, and they ask Jesus, like, why couldn't we do this? And in my mind, right, if I was Jesus, like in that situation, like my instinct would be, you didn't try hard enough, right? You didn't try hard enough. You needed to do it right. You did it wrong. You needed to do it right. But that's not what Jesus says. Jesus tells them these only come out by prayer and fasting. And I think the spirit of that is so interesting, and the spirit of that really like connects with what we're talking about today. Like when we fast, we empty ourselves. We create a physical hunger that helps us to understand like how much we're actually hungry for God. When we pray, again, we're connecting with him, right? Connection, trust. These are the words that have come out when it's actually natural. Like what Jesus is really inviting us to understand at the end of the day is like, I will do this through you. You guys failed, and the solution to the failure is not simply to try harder. The solution to this failure, if I can call it that, is to simply let me into the picture. Open up your heart and let me be there and let me work through you. And that can mean sort of lowering the bar with ourselves, and that can mean forgiving ourselves, and that can mean taking some of the pressure off of ourselves. Lord knows we have enough pressure on ourselves, financial pressure and scholastic pressure, and you've got to get the grades and you've got to get to this, right? Like prayer shouldn't be that thing with this extra pressure, like you've got to white knuckle it, like Dima said at the beginning. Prayer and fasting, which is to say sort of let us get out of our own way and allow God to work in and through us so we can have more of these natural moments when it just sort of like, I'm stepping out of the way because things are hard right now, because things are tough right now. Sometimes it's a stumble that puts us in a situation when it's natural, but just get out of the way so we can pray with the simplicity and the beauty and the joy that Simeon was able to pray with. And that's my hope, that here we are in this Lenti Lent, that all of us could have a bit more of that natural prayer and natural joy on a daily and even maybe one day constant basis.
Thanks, Steve. We really appreciate you. And to everyone who participated, you guys make this so worthwhile and so interesting. And it's just lovely to hear. Yeah, and fun. Exactly. It's so great to hear from all of you guys and all the great things you shared with each other in the chat too, the quotes and the other stories. So thanks for being a part of it. We are going to close in prayer now, and then we will stay for only 5 more minutes if there's anyone who wants to stay and have a last thought with Steve before he goes to bed. And I just wanted to mention, since prayer is our topic tonight, that our next opportunity for gathering is actually Sunday night at 8 o'clock Eastern. We'll be gathering on a Zoom call, so everyone will be able to have their window up if they want, for small compline and the Akathist of Thanksgiving, which we're doing every Sunday night for now. And it's a little different than a live stream service because you do get a chance to see people's faces, and it's all college students leading. So we hope you join us if you would like to be part of that opportunity. You can find that on ocf.net/ocf@home with dashes between. So Steve, pray for us.
I will. First, thank you, Andrew, for putting this together. Thank you for Christina for putting this together. Christina's one of my best friends. It's always awesome to do stuff with her. Take another second to bring ourselves back together. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, we thank you for being a part of our lives. We thank you for bringing us together. We ask that you open our eyes to find you at work every moment of every day. We ask that you open our hearts to truly see that when we look into the eyes of our neighbor, we look into your eyes and we encounter you more often than we realize. Help us to connect with you in a deeper way. Help us to connect with you more naturally, more joyfully, more lightly. Help us to carry out that simple prayer that Simeon was able to carry out so that we really can pray simply and pray always, not simply as we prepare to celebrate your glorious resurrection, but as we prepare to be Christians, intentional Christians, every moment of every day until we draw our last breath. We ask this, Lord, together with your beginningless Father and your all holy, good, and life-giving Spirit, now and forever, to the ages of ages.
Amen. Thank you guys for coming tonight. Caroline wants to come up and say something. And if there's anybody else, 5 minutes, that's all, because I know Andrew's tired. I can tell. Caroline, Patrick.
Hi.
Caroline, Patrick.
We just wanted to say hi.
Hello.
Steve,
Steve, big fan, big fan. Mega
Thanks.
fan.
Hi.
All right, John, wanted to say something?
No, we were just saying hi.
I wanted to say, I feel like this Lent is like the challenge mode of Lent. Like, I'm not saying that it's easy when you can go to church, but like, I don't know, it's like having church 3 times a week. Sorry for my hair. I need to get, Carolyn's going to cut it next week. But I feel like when you have church 3 times a week, it's so, it's like such a great way to like bring you like literally into God's house. But now that we're like all in our homes, it's like the challenge mode, because now we have to go above and beyond to pay full attention when you're joining in on a church live stream for all the services, or you know what I mean? Like it's you have to keep your mind so much more aware.
Because it's harder, right? It's harder like when you're looking at your laptop during a live stream and you can sort of swipe into something else. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Good
Thanks
to
for
see your
saying
whole family again.
Good job.
Good to see your whole family again.
Oh yes, we're all here.
Hello, whole family.
Hello, whole family.
Y'all have a wicked echo, so I'm gonna
Hello. I know I don't have enough time. I just want to say hi and introduce myself.
Go ahead.
My name is Hashim. I live in Canada. I study at Ryerson University, civil engineering. Sorry, like I'm not currently in Canada, so I just woke up 30 minutes ago and just saw this. I was gonna say something, but since you guys don't have time, it's fine. I'm gonna say it in the next meeting.
Thanks for saying hi.
Okay.
For those who were wondering about my background, I'm Jordanian originally.
Welcome. We love Jordanians. Patrick, and then Valentine, and then Christina, and then Danielle. 1 minute each.
At Yolani's.
Go. Thank you all.
Take care. Thanks. Patrick, are you up?
Oh yeah. Thanks for going to Yolani's. I really like that speech about especially about vulnerability and being honest with ourselves during Lent. In some ways, this quarantine has actually helped me at least do my prayer rule and stuff like that. It's actually made me a lot more appreciative. But I do think we do take the routine of it for granted, especially with communion. So thanks for that.
Thanks for that observation. I think that's powerful. Thanks, Patrick. Good to see you again.
Christina. Oh no, Valentine, and then Christina. Sorry.
Thank you very much for this webinar. Thank you very much for the talk. And I want to ask a quick question. So how do you think it's possible to distinguish the case when you do not pray because you are lazy and when it's like just formal prayer? So like how to pass between this like still and harped? Like what's like how to find like the good way, not to pray because you are lazy, but not to make it formal?
Laziness versus formality. I think that's one of those things that's probably going to be different for different people. And that's just one of those conversations to have with our priests. Because who knows? I think like because I fall into lazy in different ways and different things, and just sort of take it back to my spiritual father and be honest with him, be open with him. We can explore different strategies and different sort of like things to do and try, and different ways to sort of be open to God. It's hard to say in the abstract, but it's a good question. It's a good question. I hope you find the answer that it's going to be helpful for you.
I think in some sense your conscience does. Sometimes I think we do know though. Like there's a sense you have within yourself when you know you're being lazy, and when you know you're saying like, oh, I'm just doing this to like get it over. I think God works even with that though. Even when you offer sort of a lazy prayer or you offer sort of your worst, he still works with that. But I think, and you kind of have the same sense when you know you're doing the formality thing. When you have that like, oh shoot, I got to get through it. Like quick. There's something to do. I mean, at least that's my sense. That's usually the reason I'm getting overly formal. Is like I need to get it over with. So I think he's right. Yes, for sure. Like you should talk to your spiritual father in terms of like how much of like a set prayer rule and how much should you speak from your heart or just sit in silence. Those are really questions that are individual, but also to listen to your conscience because that was the God-given gift, and to trust that when it's convicting you of laziness or formality that it's, that's God speaking too.
That's a good answer.
Christina.
Hi.
Hey, Christina.
At home, I've definitely been struggling a lot more than I thought I would. I think I've realized kind of how selfish, I guess my actions are. I think in my prayer life and also in the fellowship that I seek in others. I think not being home, you're confronted with all the needs that you have, and because like your environment has completely changed and the things that you are given on like a daily basis on by other people changes, because now it's just, at least for me, it's like just my family. Which I don't know, like I guess I'm just struggling personally to feel like as fulfilled as possible, and like trying to really see God in every single thing and see like the beauty in the small things. I guess the mundaneness of everyday life that like school kind of eliminates, because school is super fast paced and like there's so much going on and there's so many people to see and so many clubs to go to, and like you have so many commitments that you can really eliminate that mundane feeling. But now that we've been home, it's like you're really confronted with it. And so I feel like my prayers now are becoming more like self-centered, because like I want God to like eliminate this mundaneness that I feel, and I want something to like spark or like inside me. And then I'm like feeling despair because I'm feeling sad and I don't want to feel sad and I want to feel grateful. So then I'm also like being like harsh on myself, like you said, like putting that pressure, like, oh my gosh, like I'm being a bad Christian because I'm not feeling happy. I'm feeling sad.
Yeah.
And then getting frustrated at like family members for like not meeting all your needs, and like, how do you, my real question, sorry, this is a long tangent. My real question was, how do you meet your family members where they are spiritually and still connect with them and not feel, I don't know, like sometimes I feel like at least me and my younger brother are like not on the same wavelength, or like even me and my parents, and like how much we fast or how much we pray is like not the same. And when I'm not surrounded by people similar to me, it makes me feel more alone or something, even though like I'm not alone because God's with me. Maybe sometimes I'm physically alone, but I'm not actually alone. So yeah, how do you meet them where they are without like also feeling like you're shaming them or like I'm on a high horse, and you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think one thing that I would suggest is, because you sort of led into the conversation with a little bit of sort of like self-blame. You were kind of talking about like selfishness. like maybe it's not so much about like selfishness in this negative sense, right? To kind of convict yourself and make you feel bad, right? Maybe the challenge is kind of finding more to be grateful for in the midst of these things, right? Like it's easy to be grateful when there's new things happening and things are sort of different and fresh, right? Sometimes it's harder when things settle. And this is definitely like, I think like actually maybe like a really helpful spiritual challenge. Like this is something that St. Anthony said way back in the day. It's a word he got from God. Like wherever you are, be slow to leave, right? Because things can like always have a special veneer when they're sort of like new and whatever it is. And so maybe that's kind of like my offering in terms of reframing it. In terms of what you can do, like it could be potentially something as simple as like writing down every morning like 3 things that you're grateful for, right? And then at the end of the day, like 3 things that you're grateful for, like in terms of like that day and what happened, or maybe even focus on like 3 positive interactions that you had with family members, right? A lot of, I think one of the difficult things is like, it's kind of frame of reference. I think about this like in terms of filming, right? Like the world is a sort of big thing, but like all of us, right? All of us exist in sort of rectangles, and the rectangle is sort of like where our attention goes. And we can sort of choose to move the rectangle in different directions. And we can choose to move it up or down or left or right. We can choose to zoom it in, right? And so sometimes maybe it's like, this is like a challenge of perception. And it's a challenge, not to blame yourself and say I'm being selfish, but like, how can I learn to be grateful for things that are hard to be grateful about?
And I think when you don't feel spiritually on the same page, especially with your family, sometimes it's good to like make it a point to find some way that you want to imitate those people that you think maybe, like, I feel like there was a little temptation, at least I've had that same kind of temptation to like maybe judge, or like to, like you said, to feel like you're on your high horse because you pray more or fast more, but to try to find something in each of the people in your house each day that you want. You could say, thank God for that. Like, I wish I could do more of that. Or I wish I could be more peaceful about this, or care a little less about this, whatever it is that you maybe before thought was something to deride, but you could kind of see like, in what part of my life could I also use that virtue? Like, am I myself lacking? Might help with the family dynamics. Danielle, last question of the night.
Hey, Danielle.
Not really a question. Hi. I just wanted to go back to like when prayer was like answered for me. It was definitely in the hospital when my mom passed. All day, me and my family had nothing but prayed for her to become healthy and get out of this. And her spiritual father, which is Father Don Chadden, just prayed over her, the repentance prayer and everything else. And then finally at 11:30 she passed. And when she passed, it was like I went to go see her and I came out. And when I came out, I saw the light of her spiritual father. Like no one else. It was just the light of him shining on it and saying, she's okay, she's home. Not necessarily one of the prayers we were praying were for her to get better, but like also for her to get better is also being in the kingdom of God, being with him. So that kind of like eased the pain of the death, I would say. And also like her funeral, everything was in the church. Like there was nothing that we didn't do for her in that church where she grew up. So it was like we read the Psalms that we read on Friday night vigil over her, like me and my brother and some of my cousins and some of my family. So yeah.
Sorry, Danielle, that's hard. I lost my dad too. I lost him a while ago, so that's definitely a hard thing. But I'm glad that there was this moment of beauty in the midst of an otherwise really difficult thing. God bless her. God rest her. May her memory be eternal.
Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle. It's good to see you. All right, everybody. That was more than 5 minutes. I'm really bad. I'm a really bad timekeeper because you guys all say really cool things. But thanks for coming, and we hope to see you Sunday night for prayers and next Thursday with Michelle Magias for another of Father Tom's Maxims. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Good to see you guys.